Okay, so I know maybe even some of you have never been to Rock Haven Church on a Mother's Day service before, but Rock Haven Church, in traditions past, we don't do a sermon to mothers because how dare I teach mothers about mothers on Mother's Day. But we do a sermon of what your mama wants you to know. What your mama wants you to know. That's what we do on Mother's Day. And what your mom wants you to know is that consequences or actions have consequences. Decisions have consequences. And when I said the word consequences, how many of you guys got kind of like a shivery feeling up your spine? You're thinking, that's kind of a weird word that makes me a little uncomfortable. Well, if it doesn't, it did me even when I said it. It's like consequences. It's got this bad connotation with it. Like it's something I grew up would say, well, you do that, that's going to have consequences. And it's always used in a negative sense, right? The consequences. Oh, man, okay. What did I do wrong? Please tell me what I did wrong. Consequences. That's what we did wrong. But it's not necessarily always a bad thing. Not always bad. All actions, all choices have a result. That's just the way the world works. You do something, it has a result. Sometimes that result is immediate. Sometimes that result takes time. Sometimes the result has both. It has an immediate result and a lasting result. They always have consequences. They always have choices. And now we're getting to the end of Joshua, and Joshua's kind of gathering the people together, and he's saying, here's the final word. It's the final farewell. I know we kind of play on that word in culture today, but that's really what's going on. He's saying he's about to die. He said it a number of times. He's like, I'm getting old and advanced in years. I'm getting old and advanced in years. And he says, and I'm getting tired. He's been leading Israel for a long time. They have just conquered all of the land of Israel, and he's gathering the leaders together for his final address. Have you guys ever talked to people who know they're getting older? They say what's important at the end. They get to the end and they say, this is what's been important in my life, and I want to pass that on to you right now, that this is what is important. And that's what Joshua is really doing. He's summing it all up, but at the same time, he's leaving us with final few things. This is what I want you to remember. If you remember anything about my life, I want you to remember this. And that's what Joshua is getting at. Oh, man, I don't know how many years. It must be at least 5 years ago, because one of my children was old enough to walk and to talk. So I remember walking into my bedroom, and she was in there by herself, and I said, what are you doing here? And they turned around and looked at me because they knew they had gotten caught doing something they weren't supposed to do. Okay? I can't even remember, they were playing with something that they weren't supposed to play with in the nightstand, and they got caught. And I said, what are you doing? Nothing. What are you doing? Nothing. And then they looked at me and said, Dad, can you leave the room? And I said, no. Why do you want me to leave the room? Nothing. Okay, what's going on? I mean, we know what's going on here, right? They wanted to do something. Just a young person. They know from when they're little that they were doing something wrong, that they want to do something wrong. They have no idea why they were doing it, because they never know why. You always ask them, why did you do that? Why did you make that choice? I don't know. And if you honestly think about it, ever thought about as a parent, as we ask that question, what would I say? And the answer I always come up with is, I don't know. Because I wanted to? Like, that's just the kind of the reason it is. And would you leave the room? No. And my next thought is, no, now you need to leave the room because you're plotting something, or, things like that. And it was harmless, and it was innocent, and it was something, but it just showed so much of what are we about as Christians. So much of these decisions and consequences, and all of it's based in, why are we doing this? Why are we doing this? Why are we here? What is going on in the world why am I doing things? Maybe it's just me that asks these weird questions, but so often I find myself just living from moment to moment, just living as a reactionary to everything that's happening. Something happens, and I'm just going to react to it. And that's fine until every single moment of my life becomes a reaction. And this is what happens. You stop, and all of a sudden you realize, why am I doing what I'm doing? And we don't have an answer. So then we're left with a choice of, is we either panic because we don't know what we're doing, or we ignore it and just try to never go back to it again. And that's what Joshua's really trying to get about. He's saying, why are we doing this? Why do we take time on Sundays to come here? Why do we take time to invest in Bible reading? Why do we take time to invest in what does it mean to follow Jesus in the world? What's the point? Is it because it's something we're supposed to do? We're like, yeah, it's what we're supposed to do. It's what I was raised. That's why I'm here. My mama brought me here, and that's what we thank moms every day, right? Okay, there's the mama sermon for, okay, right? But why am I here? What is this doing? What is the point of all of this? It's to get at the core reason of, what am I here? What drives my life? I don't want to live in reaction. I want to live on purpose. I want to live with intentionality. I want to live with a mission and a goal and a purpose. And that's what's so beautiful about Christianity to me, is that it gives me an absolute goal. I have a purpose in this life. It's not just something that I am a part of. It's not just something that I am a club that I joined, but it really drives the purpose of my entire life. I get to live a life for Jesus. I get to live a life for his purposes. And a part of all of that is I get the joy of doing that. That Jesus says, I want to give you life, and I want to give it to you abundantly. Not just a list of don'ts and do this, so therefore you can scrape by getting into heaven. That's not something I want to live for. I don't want to just live for just scraping by. I want to live because I have a life full of joy and purpose. Because I think at the real core of this is, when I have a life that's found in what I'm doing, that's a life full of meaning, isn't it? That's a life of consequences and choices that are good. It drives what we do. So, picking up in Joshua, we're in chapter 23, way at the end. We're going to pick it up in verse 8. And that was one of the first things I just said, that this is one of the things that Joshua wants you to remember. That choices have consequences, and because of that, we should live purposefully. We should live purposefully. So 23 verse 8 says, "But you shall cling to the Lord your God, just as you have done unto this day." That you shall cling to him. Now that's a really choice word, remember? The Bible doesn't make accidental word choices. It doesn't say that and says, well, you get what I mean. Cling. What do you think of when you think of the word cling? I mean, I'm thinking of like a koala on a branch, right? He's clinging onto something. Or if you ever try to take your kid away from something he doesn't want to, like he clings to it. Like, I will die on this hill. It's something ridiculous, I can't remember. All the screaming and the yelling of kids of hanging on to something. I will cling to him. I'm throwing everything in here. This isn't no little just like, I'm going to grasp onto it. I'm going to hang on to Jesus. I'm going to hang on to things of God. I'm going to cling to it. Remember, Joshua's dying. He knows he's dying. He knows he's going out the door. And here's some of the things he chooses to say. As you've done before. And he's trying to encourage him, as you've done up to this day, I want you to continue to cling to him. Don't let go of that. Don't continue to just be like, okay, I'm going to let go of this with one arm because I'm getting comfortable, because that's what happens, right? I'm getting comfortable, so I'm going to let go. I'm going to come over here, and I'm going to try to do something else while I'm hanging on to, and then all of a sudden it's touching, and it's like, oh, I'm just in the area. And you see how drift works? No one ever accidentally wakes up and goes, man, I'm a really good Christian today, just by accident. At the same time, no one wakes up and is like, man, what happened? I was so good yesterday, and now today I'm terrible. No one ever has that thought to begin with. But you know what I mean? No one drifts overnight. Drifting is slow. Drifting is a slow leak over time. And it's also a slow gain over time. You're not going to, if you pop the clutch when you're in a manual truck, you're not all of a sudden going to pick up speed. I mean, unless you go downhill, but that's not the point. You're just going to slowly slow down. You will not drift into holiness by accident. You have to cling to it. You have to pursue it. Well, God's going to do the work. I'm just the guy. I'm just here to follow and just do what he does, and he's going to lead the way, and I'm not. I get that. I get that we don't want to step on God's toes. I get that we don't want to impose on that. I understand the sentiment behind that. But at the same time, we also have to want it. We have to choose it. We have to continue to pursue it. God is here, and he's brought us to this point, and nothing's accidental, and nothing's happened in this world that's just a coincidence. But at the same time, we can choose to just ignore those. We can just choose to do nothing with them. At the same time, we have to, do you want to pursue Christ? I mean, I was just reading a book, and he asked the question there, and he goes, how serious are you about following the commands that Jesus says? And it's a really simple question. But it caused me to stop and think for just a minute and go, how serious am I about this? I mean, just the advanced retreat a couple weeks ago, I was talking with a kid, and I had sent them off. I had told them about rest, and I said, now you need to go and be quiet for 15 minutes. You're not allowed to check your phone. You're not allowed to talk to anyone. You just have to sit in silence for 15 minutes. And the question I asked was, are you comfortable with that? And a lot of them came back and goes, that was great. I wish I had more of it. But I really think that the wisdom of one of the students was to say, but am I really content when I'm quiet when I don't want to choose it? When it's forced upon me, when life is quiet, or when I'm told to be still? Am I okay with that when I didn't choose it? That's wisdom. To say, am I just taking what God gives me? Or am I just doing like, when I want it, and when I don't, I don't? We can't control it that way. We can't control it that way. Everything has a consequence. Skip down with me to verse 13 and 23. It says, know for certain that the Lord your God will no longer drive out these nations before you, but they shall be a snare and a trap for you. He's talking about what's going on around them, that there's going to be trouble, that there's going to be temptation, there's going to be people who are going to cause you to want to do things that is not what God wants you to do. And and a whip on sides and thorns in your eyes, it doesn't sound pleasant at all. And here it says, until you perish off this good ground that the Lord has given you. Until you perish off this good ground. At some point, all of us are going to perish. As one of my old pastors used to say, the death toll is still one per person. It's coming, unless Jesus comes back, which is great. But until that moment comes, there's an eternal consequence for this. Well, that doesn't seem fair. Well, it doesn't, but it is. It is the way it is. We go way back, Adam and Eve, sin into the world. That's the eternal consequence, isn't it? That all of us are destined for something. We're all destined for death at some point. So how do we talk about that? We can't just live reactionary moment by moment, hoping to avoid the inevitable, because we all know the inevitable is coming. And so Joshua again is saying, there's consequences. There's something coming. There's something coming. And now Joshua says in 14, and I'm about to go the way of all of the earth, and you know in your hearts and souls, all of you. And I think this is phenomenal, that not one word has failed of all of the good things that the Lord your God has promised concerning you. Not one of them has failed. All have come to pass for you. Not one has missed. That's pretty phenomenal, because here's really the second point that Joshua wants to get across to his people. One is that actions have consequences, near, far, otherwise, they always have a consequence. Part two is that God is faithful. They talk a lot about the covenant in Joshua. They talk a lot about some phenomenal things. We saw the walls of Jericho come down. We saw people be delivered just by through angels. We saw cities be completely routed by the power of God. We saw unbelievable things. We saw the sun stand still in the sky for an entire day. And God continues to be faithful again and again and again. It's incredible. It's incredible. Continues to be faithful. So really the question, the last thing that Joshua's getting at, actions have consequences, God is faithful. And the third thing that Joshua is getting at, which is really what we're going to get at here in the next chapter, is what are we going to do with it? What are we going to do with the fact that God is powerful, that he is who he says he is, that he is faithful, that our actions do have consequences? Now, how are we going to live? How are we going to live? Because Joshua's going to die in the next chapter. Sorry, that's a spoiler. How are we going to live that way? Because so often as Christians, I feel like we're so tempted to just put our head down and cover our heads and say, I'm just going to survive. Lord, if you could come tomorrow, that would be really nice, because I'm really, really tired of the world. I'm really, really sick of how the world's going. I'm really frustrated with things going on right now. And we just want to keep our head down and say, if I could just make it one more day. And I feel like that's not what he's getting at. That's not what he's getting at, because, well, all of my actions have consequences. Joel, you're just this doom and gloom picture on this Mother's Day. Way to go, Joel, doom and gloom picture. There is hope. There is good news coming. So Joshua gathers all of the people of Israel. This is 24, the first 13 verses, and he summarizes all of the things that God has done for them. All of the amazing things that God has done in the past. He goes way back to Abraham and says, when I brought Abraham out, and when I brought you guys out of Egypt, and when I brought you across the Red Sea, and when I brought you across the river, and I made Jericho fall down, I made the sun stand still. And he goes over and for 13 verses paints the faithfulness of God, the power of God in all of the situation. That's what he starts with all of these things. He's painting this beautiful picture. And in verse 14, he says, now, therefore, fear the Lord and serve him in sincerity. He's appealing to a reality. Don't just give lip service. Don't say, yep, we like Jesus, we like God, he's good. But the reality of what are you going to do with all of the things that he has done? For a long time, one of the things I used to do is at the end of my day, I'd write down, I'd call it the providences of God, where I'd write down the things that I saw where God's hand was in my life that day. And I started off and it was like, okay, I'd have to think for one or two things. And after a while, it became where I saw it in every single thing that I did. It was just a part of who I was. It was God was doing something. How can I ignore what he's doing? How can I continue to miss what he's doing? And when we start to think of God as the great provider, as the great sustainer, not just the God who I go to when I need something, all of a sudden, my life has a little bit more purpose because I realize that what I do has a goal. It has a point. It has a purpose. I'm following what he's doing because I realize that I can't, if I'm following him, I can't step wrong unless I'm out of what he wants to do, unless I'm trying to go left or right. Because he's doing that. I'm living with a purpose. The shift is starting to happen. I'm not just living reactionary. I'm living with a purpose, saying, I know what he wants, I know where we're going, and let me do step by step. And he lays out here, and he says, 15, choose this day whom you will serve. He kind of lays an ultimatum out. Look what God has done. Look at the miraculous things. And he goes, who are you going to serve? And here's a famous verse. Many of us, you've seen it in houses on walls. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. It's a really great sounding verse. But when you put it in the context of what's happening in chapter 24, he's laid it all out there. And he goes, in light of what's going on in this world, in light of the way the world is going, in light of the consequences of decision, in light of the faithfulness of God, who are you going to follow? Who are you going to follow? And of course, all the Israelites are sitting there yelling, yes, we like Jesus. Yes, we like God. They're saying the right answer. Of course they know. Of course they've seen amazing things. Far be it from us that we should ever forsake the God and go to other gods. Far be it from us. For it is the Lord our God who brought us out in Egypt and went up among us, and he drove out the peoples, and therefore we will serve him, for he is our God. And then in verse 19, Joshua says, you are not able to serve him, for he is a holy God. Wait a second. Can you just imagine the Israelite leaders? We said the right answer. I said the Jesus word. You said, what do we do? Who do we serve? We said Jesus, yes. Yep, I know the Sunday school answer. And Joshua goes, no, you don't. And then can you imagine the confusion for just a minute there? But I know the right answer. I know this. And he goes, but don't you remember all of this? You don't have the ability to, because what they said is, we will serve the Lord. But what they failed to say is, and give up the other things that we worship. If you look back, they missed that. They said, yep, we'll love Jesus, we'll say the things that are right, we'll do the right things, we'll say the right formulas, but I'm going to worship what I want to worship. And Josh goes, you can't do that. You can't know the right answers and have your life fail to reflect it. You can't do it. That's what he just says straight up. You just can't do it. And you're going to fail. If you say, yes, in my mouth, Jesus, but your life goes the other way, it's not going to go well. It's just your actions have consequences. Magic words don't reflect life changes. He's being straight up with them. But in verse 21, they go back to Joshua and says, no, we will serve him. Well, good for them. They're doubling down. They're coming back. They're saying, no, we know this. We can't. We know this is not going to work. We know that we have served other gods. We know we've made poor choices. We know we've had consequences that have come from poor actions. We realize this. We will serve the Lord. And then Joshua says, you are a witness against yourselves that you have chosen. He goes, look around at all these people. This is why church is so important. Look around at the people and we're just like, we are choosing to follow Jesus, and I'm choosing to put myself in accountability. I'm choosing to put myself in relationship, into community, where I want to be serious about this. How serious are we? I want to pursue him. I want to know him. I don't want to just do this because it sounds good, because I say the right words. I want this to be who I am. I don't want this to be just a part of me. I want this to be the entirety of me. Who I am in Christ, my identity is so important to what we believe. It's so important to what we believe because it can't just be an extracurricular activity. It can't just be another thing we add to my life because our lives are already so busy. So busy. But Jesus says, I don't want a part, I want all. Well, that's not fair. He made you. He breathed life into you. He provides for you, and he sustains for you. Seems like a good trade to me. Okay? And then Joshua says in 23, put away the foreign gods that are among you, and incline your heart to the Lord. And the people said to Joshua, the Lord we will serve. So Joshua made a covenant with the people that day and put in place statutes and rules for them at a place called Shechem. And Joshua wrote these words from the book of the law. He wrote the book of Deuteronomy on a large stone and set it up underneath there, under the terebinth, which is like an arch. And that was by the sanctuary of the Lord. So we talked about remembering why that's there, to remember that we are working towards this. We are striving towards being more like Christ. We are striving to following God. We are not just trying to live reactionary. We're trying to live purposefully. We're trying to not continue to go back to the gods that we had. We're trying to pursue the one God. We're trying to do all of these things again and again. And Joshua's trying to remind them. So he takes this huge, large stone and writes the law, writes the promise that they've made to the people, and he sets it up there. Remember, this is one of like 4 or 5 times in the book of Joshua. They make piles of rocks or piles of stones, and they say, when you go by it, you remember it. And when you remember it, tell it to your kids and your grandkids. Tell them what the faithfulness of God was in that generation. It's not just this memory of, oh, hey, remember that one time? But memory in the Bible means we must do something with it. Memory is an action verb in the Hebrew. It requires us to do something with the memory of it. I remember God's faithfulness. How does that affect the way that I live and how the way that I go? And that's continually there, and it's continually reminding us, and every time we walk by it. Well, that's great, Joel. That's great. Well, the rock. It doesn't really matter to me, a rock anymore. It's about 12 years ago, I went to Israel, and I went to a place called Shechem, which is where this was. And it is one of the most rundown, like wild dogs. Like we had to carry rocks with us to throw at wild dogs as they came to us. And it's just full of garbage, and it was buildings that are abandoned, and it looked really sketchy. And we stop in our bus, and the guy's like, get out. And we're like, no. We're not getting out. No, get out, I promise. Okay, whatever. And so we wander around, we wander past these things. We're kind of trying to like keep our head down and things like this. And we get to this grassy area, and there's a bunch of rocks, and there's a bunch of graffiti all over the places. And we're like, yay, we're here, What's going on with this? And he points to this giant rock. Alicia, you want to throw that picture up? And he points to this rock out in the middle of nowhere. And he goes, and that's the rock that Joshua put up when he said, this is your witness stone. Here's the covenant that you had. That's the same rock. Okay, that rock is roughly 3,100 years old. That's a really, really old rock. Okay, obviously it has been graffitied and broken, but that's the rock. That's why the place of the Lord, in this absolute ridiculous, destitute, you can see the fences back there. It is not a pleasant place to be. It is a hostile place to be. And I remember just kind of being in awe, because America is like, 270 years old? Add another 3,000 years, and there's this rock that has been there to show we want to be faithful, but God is faithful. And in my moment of listening to this, I feel like God kind of gave me my own little encouragement, and he said, and I will be faithful to you far beyond when that rock is gone. 3,200 years of faithfulness, and God says, but I'll be faithful far beyond that. Far beyond that. Because actions have consequences. God is faithful still. The Israelites made this covenant, and you know what? They still screwed up. The next book of Judges is a really bad book. It's all about Continual spiral downward of Israel's failure again and again and again. And I look at my life and I say, well, when I said yes to Jesus, my life has continued to be not perfect. I still mess up again and again and again. So why on earth is this still, why am I still here? Why am I still following? Why is God still good and faithful to me? Because he's good and faithful. That's who he is. You can't separate that out from him. He is good and faithful. We talk about consequences of actions. We have sin. We have problem in our life that causes us to have a destination that is not friendly. But God in his mercy, being faithful and loving, says, let me take care of that. I know that you can't keep your end of the covenant. I know that you have sin. I know that you will continue to choose to not follow me. I know that you're going to continue to worship other gods. But I will still send Jesus to die for you. I will still send someone to live and to die for you. I will still cover that for you. Actions have consequences, but sometimes God in his supernatural love and power says, but let me cover this one. The big one, the ultimate one, death. He's like, I'm going to take it out. Okay, that's pretty important. So when you see these things in your life, obviously it's just the rock. But the God who it signifies the eternal faithfulness, not just long faithfulness. 3,200 years is nothing in terms of eternity. The continual, everlasting, long-suffering faithfulness of God for you. Isn't that incredible? That's incredible. And that's what Joshua ends with. Miles, you kind of come up as I'm doing this. This is what Joshua ends with, saying, I will be faithful. Yes, consequences of actions, and yes, we will still have to deal with those in the short term and the long term, but the ultimate sacrifice, the ultimate consequence that we are in Christ, that we are destined for a life of eternity in hell, can be absolutely taken out because God said, I will do that for you. Well, I try to wrap a book up in 30 minutes, so that's how that goes, right? But Joshua leaves us with three things. Consequences are part of life, but God is faithful. So what are we going to do with that now? How does that compel us to live? What does that do for us in the purpose of how that we live as Christians? So have a great Sunday. Make sure, moms, I know Ardell's got chocolate for you, so make sure you get that. If you don't want it, you can bring it to me. Have a great Sunday. See you guys.